Picture this, a country that was told it couldn't win, a country that was outgunned, outnumbered, and pressured to surrender territory before a single negotiator sat down at the table. That country just struck the heart of Russia's ballistic missile program, and from over 2,400 kilometers away, with missiles it built itself in secret under constant bombardment. That happened last week, and that's just the beginning of what we're about to cover today. Welcome back. If you're new here, this is where we break down the real story behind the headlines, the tactics, the technology, and the geopolitical chessboard that most channels simply don't have time to explain. Subscribe now, because what's unfolding on the battlefield right now is moving faster than the news cycle can track. Today we are covering one of the most extraordinary weeks in the entire history of this war. Multiple simultaneous operations, gains on the southern front, a reversal on the northern line, deep strike missions inside Russia itself, and a Ukrainian missile that just proved it can reach anywhere from Moscow to the Ural Mountains. Zelensky said it himself just days ago. These words deserve to be heard carefully. We have now reached a turning point that could change the fate of the war. You've heard that line before. But today, when you see what actually happened across at least 4 or 5 distinct fronts simultaneously, you will understand why this time those words carry real weight. Let's start at the 0 point, the place where it all began, Zaporizhzhia, the southern front. This is where the chain reaction ignited. Over the past 2 weeks, Ukrainian armed forces have liberated dozens of villages across this region. Each one represents a collapsed Russian defensive line. But here's what made this counteroffensive different from anything we've seen since the Kharkiv Blitz of 2022. The breakthrough didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere at once. Ukrainian forces advanced northwest of Verbov. They reduced Russian pressure around Stepov. They liberated 8 more settlements in the Oleksandrivka direction. And then Ukrainian units began pushing toward the village of Kalinivska, initiating direct clashes. This entire cascade of movement was confirmed by the Institute for the Study of War, the Ukrainian General Staff, multiple OSINT accounts, and international media. Geolocated footage, satellite imagery, local reports, all of it pointing to the same conclusion. Russia's defensive lines in the south were cracking. Now let's talk numbers, because numbers matter. Maps published by ISW showed Ukrainian-controlled territory covering Verbov, Kopani, Nova, and Kalanki. The total area of gains mentioned by Zelensky reached approximately 300 square kilometers. Let that land for a second. 300 square kilometers retaken in 2 weeks. Here's where it becomes remarkable. Do you remember Ukraine's Kursk incursion in the summer of 2024? Within the first week of that operation, Ukrainian forces seized roughly 250 to 300 square kilometers of Russian territory. The same scale of advance that shocked the world inside Russia, the Russians are now experiencing inside their own occupation zone in southern Ukraine. The roles have reversed. The map is blue where Russia thought it was red. And this is not an accident. This is the result of a deliberate, layered operational strategy. Defense Forces spokesperson Vladislav Voloshin explained the mechanics. Ukrainian troops were carrying out counterattacks and offensive actions across the Zaporizhzhia region simultaneously. Control was reestablished in multiple settlements along the border of the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups were cleared. The gray zones were shrinking. This was not chaotic. This was orchestrated. But here's where it gets really interesting. Behind these advances on the southern front was a force that most people overlook: the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces, the paratroopers, Ukraine's airborne elite. The Ukrainian Air Assault Forces officially confirmed a major ongoing offensive along the Oleksandrivka axis. This was a high-risk, deliberately designed mission to disrupt Russia's plans to push into both Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia oblasts. The operation was led by Air Assault Forces Commander General Ole Apostol, and it included 2 of Ukraine's most decorated brigades, the 82nd Bukovina and the 95th Airborne, operating at an extremely high operational tempo. The battlefield was described as, and I'm quoting here, extremely dynamic. Despite intense Russian resistance and the deployment of significant enemy reserves thrown into the breach, Ukrainian paratroopers maintained the initiative. They repelled Russian counterattacks. They kept advancing. This was sustained pressure from elite units against an enemy that was already stretching its reserves thin. And that thinning of Russian reserves is itself a critical development. According to ISW analysis from February 2026, the reserves of Russia's western grouping of forces had been funneled north to contain Ukrainian counterattacks near Kupyansk, leaving them unavailable to reinforce operations in the south. Ukraine was, in effect, pulling Russia's forces in two directions at once. This is operational art at its finest. Let's talk about the Spartan Brigade, because this story deserves your attention. National Guard soldiers within this elite unit carried out a precision operation to destroy Russian infantry and armor in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. The target was a Russian military convoy operating along a key logistical route used to supply Russian southern offensives. The Russians had been improvising, attaching weapon systems to pickup trucks and ATVs in the kind of battlefield modifications you'd expect from a force under constant pressure. The convoy was moving. The Spartan Brigade hit it on the road. The entire column was destroyed before it reached its destination. One operation, one convoy, 0 survivors. These are not isolated incidents. These are symptoms of a Russian army that is running low on both equipment and morale on the southern axis. And then came the numbers from the SBU Alpha Special Forces, the full accounting of what Ukraine destroyed in just the past week on the southern front. 3 tanks, 4 armored vehicles, 16 artillery systems, 4 multiple rocket launchers, 3 air defense systems, 2 electronic warfare systems, 231 vehicles, 227 drones, 17 robotic systems, 4 ammunition depots, 4 fuel depots, and over 2,000 Russian soldiers removed from the battlefield. That is not a setback. That is a catastrophe for Russian force projection in the south. But before we continue, a quick word from today's sponsor. We'll be right back to the story. Now, back to the front. The fire that started in Zaporizhzhia didn't stay in Zaporizhzhia. It spread. And when it reached the Kupyansk front, roughly 300 kilometers to the north, it produced one of the most stunning tactical results of the entire war. Ukrainian forces advanced toward Vachansk under the cover of the Seversky Donets River. They isolated and completely destroyed an entire Russian battalion, not degraded, not scattered, destroyed. As a coherent fighting unit, that Russian battalion ceased to exist. Joint Forces Task Force spokesman Viktor Trihub delivered the assessment with cold precision. Russian forces in Kupyansk, he said, controlled less than 3% of the city. Only a few dozen soldiers were sheltering in scattered buildings. These soldiers were not fighting. They were surviving. They were trapped north and east of Kupyansk beyond the Oskil River with no realistic means of reinforcement. ISW confirmed this picture in its February 23, 2026 assessment, noting that Ukrainian forces had recently advanced near Kupyansk and Oleksandrivka. Russian mill bloggers, typically reluctant to admit bad news, were themselves criticizing their own command for filing false reports about seized territory. One mill blogger explicitly warned that a Russian flag appearing in a settlement does not constitute control. Control only exists when the front line has moved tens of kilometers further forward. By that definition, Russia controls almost nothing in Kupyansk. The 116th Independent Mechanized Brigade added to the Russian misery by destroying a vehicle, an ATV, and a mortar crew, stripping mobility and fire support from units that already had almost none. And then came the drone strike on the Russian ammunition depot in the direction of South Slobozhansky in Kharkiv Oblast. Drone operators from the Heart Brigade located it. They dove a drone through a window. Watch the video if you can find it, because it is a masterclass in precision. Even depots concealed inside forests or village structures were located, penetrated, and detonated. Ukraine did not stumble into these successes. It hunted them. Now here is where the strategic picture expands in ways that even seasoned analysts are struggling to fully absorb. These operations were not just about recapturing villages. They were about something far larger. The operations in the Zaporizhzhia-Kharkiv corridor were also telegraphing a strategic signal that Ukraine will not surrender Donbass, will not accept partition, will not give an inch of sovereign territory under pressure. Zelensky said it plainly in his Munich speech on February 18th. The war began in the east and in Crimea. Ukraine will not yield on Donbass. Not now. Not ever. To underscore that message, Ukrainian forces destroyed a Russian Tor air defense antenna positioned 1 kilometer from occupied Donetsk, a radar system specifically designed to intercept UAVs. Ukraine found it. Ukraine killed it. On the night of February 22nd, Two Russian defensive strongholds near Donetsk and Mariupol were destroyed. And then came the oil depot strike in Luhansk. This was not a random target. This depot supplied fuel to Russia's 41st and 20th Combined Arms Forces operating in eastern Ukraine. FP2 drones located it and hit it. The video showed massive secondary explosions, a towering column of smoke visible for kilometers. The depot was full. Chain reactions tore through it. Here is what that actually means in operational terms. Without fuel, tank units stop. Armored vehicles stop. Artillery pieces fire less. Logistics convoys slow down. Every liter of fuel that burned in that depot is a Russian capability that no longer exists on the Eastern Front. This is how you wage modern war, not just by killing soldiers, by systematically destroying the systems that keep an army fighting. But here's where this week transcends anything we've covered before. Because Ukraine did not stop at the occupied territories, Ukraine reached deep into Russia itself and struck targets that Russia believed were untouchable. The Flamingo has landed. On the night of February 20th to 21st, 2026, Ukraine's armed forces launched a strike that will likely be studied in military academies for decades. Using domestically produced FP5 Flamingo long-range cruise missiles, Ukraine hit the Votkinsk machine-building plant in Russia's Udmurt Republic. The plant is located more than 400 kilometers from Ukrainian territory. That is the longest-range strike Ukraine has ever executed. Let's talk about what Votkinsk actually is, because this matters enormously. The Votkinsk plant is one of the most critical facilities in Russia's entire military-industrial complex. It produces Iskander-M short-range ballistic missiles, the exact system Russia has been firing at Ukrainian cities for 3 years. It produces Topol-M intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the United States. And according to multiple analysts, it is also suspected of producing the Oreshnik, Putin's supposedly invincible hypersonic ICBM system. This is not a peripheral target. This is the factory that keeps Russia's ballistic missile arsenal alive. Ukrainian defense firm Firepoint, the company behind the Flamingo, confirmed the strike. Company co-owner Denis Shtillerman had cryptically posted a video of a Flamingo launch on February 20th with the caption, "No context, context later." The General Staff's confirmation the next morning provided the context. Ukraine's General Staff confirmed the destruction of Workshop Number 22 at the plant on February 20th, 2026. According to unconfirmed but credible reports, Workshop 22 is the site of final missile assembly. A fire was recorded on the plant's territory. Missile expert Fabian Hoffman, a doctoral researcher at the University of Oslo who specializes in missile technology and nuclear strategy, called this, and I'm paraphrasing, the first time Ukraine has successfully struck a core target of Russia's missile industry directly using a heavy missile capability. Russia had built trenches and fences around this plant. They had radar coverage. They had air defenses. None of it was enough. Retired Lieutenant General Igor Romanenko, speaking to Ukrainian media, put it this way: Ukraine is increasing production of these missiles. The military-industrial complex is solving the location security problem. The results speak for themselves. Now let's zoom out, because Votkinsk was not the only target. During the same operation, Ukraine simultaneously struck a gas processing plant in Russia's Samara Oblast, a fuel and lubricants warehouse in Russian-controlled Donetsk, a drone workshop near Nova Karakuba in Donetsk Oblast, and a military logistics depot in Polohi in the occupied part of Zaporizhzhia region. One night, one coordinated operation, multiple targets across thousands of kilometers, and the Flamingo had already been busy. In January 2026, Ukraine had used these same missiles to strike the Kapustin Yar test range in Russia's Astrakhan Oblast, the facility where Russia has been developing and testing the Oreshnik system. According to Ukraine's General Staff, a number of hangar-type buildings sustained significant damage. Part of the personnel was evacuated. Putin's most celebrated weapon, the one he announced with great fanfare to intimidate the West, was hit where it sleeps. Earlier in February, Flamingo missiles had also struck the Gryu ammunition depot near Kotlubin in Volgograd Oblast, one of the largest ammunition storage sites in Russia's southern logistics network. Powerful explosions, secondary detonations, destroyed. The Flamingo specifications, a range reportedly up to 3,000 kilometers, a warhead weighing approximately 1,150 kilograms. Mass production began in the winter of 2025 to 2026, with output targeting 7 missiles per day. Even a Russian strike on a Firepoint manufacturing facility, confirmed by Zelensky in a February 23rd interview with German broadcaster Tagesschau, only caused a temporary delay. Production resumed. More missiles were built. More are coming. The question, as missile analyst Hoffman put it, is not whether Flamingo works. The question is how many Ukraine can produce and which targets it will prioritize next. Russia is now trying to solve an equation it cannot solve. Its air defenses were designed to stop Western missiles. They were not designed to stop a domestically produced Ukrainian cruise missile that costs a fraction of a Storm Shadow and can now apparently reach Moscow. Speaking of Moscow, Ukraine launched approximately 100 unmanned aerial vehicles toward Russia's capital in a coordinated drone assault. The scale of the attack forced authorities to close all 4 of Moscow's major airports, Vnukovo, Domodedovo, Sheremetyevo, and Zhukovsky, simultaneously. Flights were diverted. 200 flights delayed or canceled. Moscow Mayor Sobyanin claimed 25 drones were shot down, but the airport stayed closed. The airspace stayed restricted. This was not Russia's first experience of this in 2026. In January, Ukraine had launched multi-day drone campaigns against the Moscow region. On January 4th, 28 drones were shot down. On January 3rd, 29 were intercepted. Despite those numbers, airports were still forced to close repeatedly. Here is the strategic reality that these numbers reveal. Russia can intercept drones, but the act of interception itself costs money, costs missiles, costs radar time, costs decision-maker attention, and it cannot stop all of them. Ukraine is not trying to flatten Moscow with drones. Ukraine is forcing Russia to spend resources, disrupt its own economy, and constantly demonstrate to the Russian public that the war has come home. Every canceled Moscow flight is a political statement. Every closed airport is a message. Now let's look at one more operation because it deserves its own place in this story. On the evening of February 20th, Ukrainian forces attacked the Pugachevka airfield in Russia's Orenburg Oblast with long-range kamikaze drones. The result, one Mi-8SH military transport helicopter destroyed, one Ka-52 attack helicopter destroyed. The Ka-52 is one of Russia's most capable attack rotorcraft. Ukraine reached into Russia's deep rear and killed 2 of them on the ground. In Belgorod, the Frunzovskaya electrical substation in the Dragonskoye district was struck. Local residents reported powerful explosions. Widespread power outages followed across surrounding settlements and in Belgorod city itself. Russian air defenses were active for an extended period. Some drones were neutralized. Most hit their targets. In the Tver region, satellite imagery captured the aftermath of an attack on a chemical plant connected to the ISK Miscom company, which produces plastic lubricants for the Russian Ministry of Defense. A workshop was destroyed. Russia is being hit simultaneously in its occupied territories, in its border regions, in its energy infrastructure, in its military-industrial complex, and in its capital's airspace. Let me now take a step back and give you the full picture, because when you map all of these operations against each other, something extraordinary becomes visible. Ukraine is executing what military strategists call multi-domain convergence, simultaneous operations across the tactical, operational, and strategic levels designed to overwhelm the enemy's decision-making capacity at every layer simultaneously. On the tactical level, Zaporizhzhia counteroffensives, Kupyansk encirclements, Donetsk stronghold destructions. On the operational level, coordinated strikes on fuel depots, ammunition depots, air defense systems, and logistics networks across thousands of kilometers. On the strategic level, Flamingo strikes on ballistic missile factories, ICBM test ranges, helicopter bases, and Moscow's airspace, designed to degrade Russia's ability to wage this war at its source. According to Euronews reporting from February 17th, ISW confirmed the main Ukrainian advance was recorded roughly 80 kilometers east of Zaporizhzhia city. ISW analysts also noted that Ukraine's counterattacks were being supported by a critical development. Russia's unauthorized use of Starlink terminals had been cut off as of February 1st. SpaceX, working with Ukraine's defense ministry, implemented a whitelist system. Russian forces had been mounting Starlink receivers on attack drones to extend their range and precision. That capability was now gone, and the timing of Ukraine's counteroffensive was not coincidental. Ukraine struck harder, faster, and deeper the moment Russia's drone networks went partially blind. Now let's look at Russia's position from the Kremlin's towers, because the view from there has never been darker. 300 square kilometers of territory lost in the south, a city being recaptured in the north, ballistic missile factories burning in the Urals, helicopter bases hit in the deep rear, an ICBM test range damaged, the skies over Moscow temporarily closed, and an opposition network of Ukrainian drones that neither air defenses nor trenches around nuclear-capable factories have been able to stop. And here is the number that should alarm Moscow's war planners most of all. According to ISW's February 15th assessment, Russian weekly territorial gains peaked at 141 square kilometers in late January. By the week of February 8th to 14th, they had already fallen to just 74 square kilometers, almost halved, even before Ukraine's major counteroffensive moves were fully consolidated. The momentum had shifted before the world even noticed. Russia is spending enormous resources to advance at walking pace through fields and tiny villages. Ukraine is spending those same resources to hit the factories that build the weapons Russia uses to do the walking. The cost-exchange ratio of this war just shifted. Now, it would be dishonest to pretend there are no complications in this picture. The peace talk situation remains a tangle. According to the Kyiv Independent, negotiations in Geneva on February 17th and 18th ended again in stalemate. The U.S. had proposed a joint Russian-Ukrainian civilian administration to run a demilitarized zone in Donbass. Ukrainian officials rejected it as unrealistic and unacceptable. Russia continued its maximalist demands: full cession of 4 oblasts, no NATO membership, full Ukrainian withdrawal from its own claimed territory. Zelensky himself was clear when speaking to Tagesschau on February 23rd. Ukraine will continue developing the Flamingo, Ukraine will continue building its military-industrial capacity, and Ukraine understands that overcoming Russia's layered air defenses requires combining mass drone attacks with heavy missile strikes, exactly what Russia does to Ukraine, turn back on the aggressor. Zelensky also addressed the Oreshnik situation. Russia currently has 3 Oreshnik systems deployed on Russian territory, he said. Ukraine can see them. Ukraine is working on the problem. Think about what that implies for a moment. The weapon Putin has spent years claiming is unstoppable, the one he launched at Dnipro in November 2024 as a demonstration of Russian omnipotence, is now a system that Ukraine tracks, targets, and actively plans countermeasures against. Ukraine already hit its development range at Kapustin Yar in January. The Votkinsk plant that likely produces it was hit in February. Russia's most fearsome weapon is on Ukraine's targeting list. Let's talk about what this means for the coming weeks and months. ISW has assessed that Russian forces are at least several months away from being able to launch a meaningful ground offensive from the north or east, the so-called Fortress Belt approach. Russia's reserves in the western grouping are already depleted by the Kupyansk crisis. Redeployments from other sectors would create new vulnerabilities, and Ukraine continues to degrade the logistics infrastructure that any future Russian offensive would depend upon. Zelensky's political calculus is equally important. He is signaling to Western partners, especially an American administration that has been pressing for a negotiated settlement, that Ukraine does not need to negotiate from weakness. Ukraine is demonstrating, action by action, strike by strike, that it has the operational capacity to change the conditions of any eventual agreement. Every factory destroyed, every depot detonated, every Russian battalion encircled strengthens Ukraine's hand at a table where Russia is still demanding maximum concessions. The momentum of this war is not a fixed thing. It has shifted before. At Kiev in 2022, at Kharkiv in late 2022, at Kherson in late 2022. It shifted again now. The difference is that this time Ukraine is not just defending or reconquering territory, it is reaching into the geographic heart of Russia and destroying the infrastructure of Russian military power itself. This is a new phase. And here is the final truth that the view from the Kremlin makes undeniable. A war that Russia began believing it would win in 3 days. A war that it has now been fighting for over 4 years. A war in which a country it tried to erase from the map has developed its own cruise missiles, built its own drone armies, trained its own airborne assault forces, and is now striking targets deep inside Russia that Soviet-era planners would have considered invulnerable. Russia did not just fail to win quickly. It created the conditions for its own long-term strategic erosion. The fire started in Zaporizhia. It is spreading. The coming days will be critical. The front is fluid. More strikes are being planned. More Flamingo missiles are being built, and Ukraine's operations tempo shows no sign of slowing. We'll be watching all of it closely, and we'll bring you the full breakdown as it develops. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now is the time. Hit subscribe, enable notifications, and make sure you don't miss what comes next. Because if this week is any indication, what comes next will be extraordinary. Thank you for choosing us, and thank you for watching.